throw. One-on-one. Davis has it. Touchdown. Carolina wins. Carolina is the Coastal Division champion. Javonte Williams to the left of Howell. He'll send him out into the flat right side. Howell looking, standing tall, lets it go. Man there. Touchdown. Touchdown, Carolina. The pistol. Jackson behind him. Hands off to Jackson. He tried a jump pass, and it's intercepted. Surratt intercepts it. Holy cow, Carolina's going to win. And off to Javonte Williams again. Pops it to the left. Javonte leaps over a man, crosses the 50, trucks over a defender, spins by another. Goodness gracious, he's down to about the 15, and he did absolutely everything in one carry.
Here's the shotgun snap to Aguilar. Drops back. Pressure coming. Aguilar floats it up. Incomplete. No flags. Head on back up the mountain. Carolina wins it in double overtime. Loftus out of the shotgun. Throws to the end zone. Incomplete. Incomplete. The bell belongs to us. Carolina wins it. 47-45 in double overtime.
Bernard fields it at the 26. Heading to the far side. Gio at the 35. Gio, he's at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Gio is going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me?
What's going on, guys? Welcome into another edition of the Heel Tough Blog Podcast. It's your host, Anthony Pagnotta, with you guys as always. And alongside me tonight, it is Zack Hubbard, which means, guys, it is time to talk a little bit of Tar Heel recruiting as the Tar Heels closed out the 2025 class with 27 commitments across the board. Of course, some guys that signed early, a majority of this group which signed late. And so work done by Bill Belichick. We're going to talk about that here on this edition of the show tonight, as we always do, going through the class. We'll talk about some of the storylines around the late additions from Carolina since the last time that we talked to you about recruiting. And then, of course, we will give out some superlatives for the class as we always do. So make sure you stick around for that towards the end of the episode. But as I mentioned, we're talking about the Tar Heels 2025 signing class tonight. And so in case you didn't know what all the guys that are in the class, I'm going to run through them here really quickly just so that you guys know everybody that is in this class. It starts with 4-star quarterback Bryce Baker from East Forsyth High School in Kernersville, North Carolina. 4-star defensive lineman Austin Alexander from Cooper High School in Cooper, Kentucky. You have 4-star edge rusher Chinadu Onyegoro from King Drew Magnet School in Los Angeles, California, one of the late additions to this class. Quarterback Arturi Newkirk from Maury High School, in Norfolk, Virginia. You have 3-star safety Javian Butts from Jones County High School in Gray, Georgia. You have 3-star interior offensive lineman Byron Nelson from Katy High School in Katy, Texas. 3-star linebacker Tyler Hauser from Pope John the 12th School in Sparta, New Jersey. 3-star defensive lineman Devin Ankrum from Mill Creek High School in Houston, Georgia. You then move on to 3-star wide receiver Evan Haynes from Fellowship Christian School in Roswell, Georgia. 3-star interior offensive lineman Trey Blue from Cary High School in Cary, North Carolina, the longest tenured commit in the class. 3-star running back Demon June Jr. From Jacksonville High School in Jacksonville, North Carolina. 3-star athlete Kennedy Uzama from St. John's Catholic School in Buckystown, Maryland. 3-star linebacker Jake Bauer from Malvern Prep in Malvern, Pennsylvania. You have 3-star running back Joseph Trope from Berkeley Prep in Tampa, Florida. You have 3-star defensive lineman Nico Maggio from Buford High School in Buford, Georgia. Jareel Cobb, the 3-star running back from Reedsville High School in Reedsville, North Carolina. 3-star defensive lineman Terry Nwabusi Ezeala from Rabun Gap Nechui School in Rabun Gap, Georgia. Lance Pascal, the 3-star linebacker from St. Thomas Aquinas High School in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. 3-star wide receiver Shenard Clower from Lakeland High School in Lakeland, Florida. 3-star athlete, a guy who was just added yesterday, Madrid Tucker from Fort Myers High School in Fort Myers, Florida. 3-star kicker Gaetano Bartholomew from Bergen Catholic School in Ordell, New Jersey. 3-star defensive lineman Trey Giddens from Green Run High School in Virginia Beach, Virginia. Unranked running back Jalen Nichols from Neville High School in Neville, Louisiana. Unranked edge rusher Emmanuel Nwaiwu from Vanier College in Montreal, Quebec. You have unranked defensive lineman Yasir Smith from Somerville High School in Somerville, South Carolina. Unranked defensive lineman Kamarian Thomas from Erasmus Hall School in Brooklyn, New York. And then, of course, unranked defensive lineman Ladarian Williams from Douglas County High School in Douglasville, Georgia. He was the last addition to the class. So those are all 27 of the guys that signed up for this class, whether it was early or whether it was yesterday. And so that group, when you look at that group, Zach, how shocked are you, first of all, by the sheer number of guys that Carolina was able to find? We talked about last year being such a big group, took up a lot of roster spots. And I think the expansion of rosters from 85 scholarships to 105 scholarships certainly played a role here. But how about the fact that even after, they don't end up having a coach for the early signing period, Bill Belichick comes in and finds a way to put together a class like this?
Yeah, I mean, even taking into account the aspect of roster expansion, which is expected under the House settlement, or expansion of scholarships per se, the fact that they were able to do this quickly is pretty surprising when you take into account, like you mentioned, that they did not have a coach in the early signing period. They had just gotten Coach Belichick hired sort of shortly thereafter, and then some time, elapsed in the process of building this staff. So they've been able to work very quickly, despite sort of the staggering of these hires for one reason or another as guys became available. So they've done a lot of work in a short period of time, not only in the transfer portal, but in high school recruiting to bolster these numbers. It's clear that they want to get, a good number of guys in here and see how the chips fall with that. So it is very, a little surprising, but also very encouraging that they were able to act so quickly in such a short period of time where there's not a lot going on. And it'll be interesting to see moving forward with the 2026 class, what they're able to do in sort of a more normal period of recruiting as to what do those results look like? What do, the early returns look like? How is this staff perceived? Those are things that we're still looking to figure out. And it's pretty fascinating just overall.
Yeah, I think there's no doubt about that because, you're talking about a class that went from ranked in the 80s on 24/7 Sports composite rankings to finishing up ranked 43rd and number 10 in the ACC. What a change that is from being last place in the ACC and last place amongst all power conference teams in the recruiting cycle. At one point, Mac Brown was still employed and knew he was going to be employed moving forward. At least that's what he thought. So I think this is, you have to be pretty amazed. And I get it, man. They dug deep on a lot of these guys. You can tell when you go to a site like On3 that has them number 55 overall and number 12 in the ACC. Yeah, this was a group that, is not going to blow anybody away. A lot of developmental guys, a lot of guys that are upside pickups, especially towards the end. But I think they did get some really solid guys here and some guys that can really help. Some guys that, started out unranked, and there's a few of them that have, made significant jumps because of the fact that, people have finally gotten to take a look at them. These were really good gets for Carolina, and we'll talk about some of those here throughout the night. But I'm really encouraged by what you see. And, the 2026 class, that's where you're expecting to see more of the high-end players. And you're seeing, Carolina is pretty much offering, 5-star, 4-star, high-end 3-star talent so far. Now, eventually, I think they'll start to get into some of those guys that are ranked as, maybe mid-level 3 stars and guys that they really just like. But for now, they're going after the big fish. They want the guys that have that big star number next to them, and they're looking for blue chip prospects. And I think that's the class where you're really going to see it start to settle in. But, when you look at this group, Zach, I think one of the most interesting things here is you start out with the quarterback position, because Bryce Baker, comes in, eventually signs with the early signing class. He is enrolled with the team, and he is going to go through spring practice. But with, the departure of Jacoby Criswell, that offered up a scholarship. Some wondered, would Carolina potentially fill that scholarship spot with a transfer? Now, look, it's certainly still possible that Carolina goes out and gets a transfer quarterback if there is a big name that enters, and especially if they do struggle, to find somebody that they really like, or if there are, all the guys that are going out for that starting quarterback job really don't get off to a great start. But they go and bring in Arturi Newkirk, a guy who really all he's done so far in his career is win at a high level. And initially when he was brought in, he was a guy that I think a lot of people looked at and said, okay, how good really is he? Because he's not ranked, and, we have to wait and see whether or not, he actually turns out, when he does get ranked, to be a legitimate prospect. Now, this is a guy that finishes up in the composite rankings at 773rd overall, for the 49th ranked quarterback. And it looks like the Tar Heels have not one, but 2 legitimate quarterbacks in this class.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there's a pretty open runway in the upcoming season, in the 2025 season, for North Carolina to have one of these guys compete either for a starting job or for that backup job. Like you mentioned, Jacoby Criswell gone, Michael Merdinger gone, and also your initial starting quarterback for the 2024 season was Max Johnson. Had a pretty significant injury in that game, and his status, at least at this point, is somewhat unknown in terms of a timetable for, will he be able to come back? What's that timetable for him to start throwing? If that's the case, we don't know. And besides that, they got a transfer in Ryan Brown, but it's pretty wide open in terms of this depth chart. So I think for Bryce Baker specifically, there's certainly a runway, even as a true freshman, for him to compete for that starting role on this team. Obviously was very highly rated, did well at the Elite 11 camp over the summer, ended up being ranked in the top 100. So that's a guy that it's not unfounded for those type of guys, similar to a Sam Howell, for instance, to come in and make an immediate impact and, compete for starting time immediately. Likely with any true freshman quarterback, there could be some bumps along the way, but the opportunity's there. We'll see sort of in the spring and into the fall, but the opportunity is certainly there for him, excuse me. And then, like you mentioned, they got another guy very quickly in Arturi Newkirk here in the, sort of in this second period after the early signing period, was unranked, but that was largely due to not really throwing at camps, not really going and throwing on campus, really just going through his high school career. Which that's generally, there's a lot of ways that it's hard for guys to fall through the cracks. It's pretty easy when you're not going to camps and you're not throwing on college campuses or things along those lines. So, when a Bill Belichick gets involved, it causes people to reevaluate sort of what the film shows. And I mean, you see a lot on the film. You see a guy that in several years could be a very, very good quarterback, a guy that is mobile, a guy that can throw the ball well, looks fairly athletic. So, this quarterback room with this tandem of guys is probably one of my favorite in this class, just the North Carolina recruiting class overall. This position might be my top one, just because you got a guy that you feel like is a, future very, very likely star in Bryce Baker. And then you found what is it potentially, a diamond in the rough in Arturi Newkirk. It's hard to ask for much better in terms of quarterback recruiting when you get 2 guys like that in the same class.
Yeah, and this is just a lot of credit to Bill Belichick and his guys for finding this guy. I mean, I described him when, I first took a look at his film, and I said that this dude was a hidden gem. I mean, you look at him, size, once was a concern with him, but, now 6'3", 200 pounds, very solid player. Thought the arm strength was really what jumped off the page. I mean, a lot of throws down the field. Very easily gets the ball out down the field. And, it doesn't, even when under pressure, still has a cannon of an arm. The accuracy, all three levels, definitely seems strong. Love the footwork from him as well. He can make plays off platform, thrives in situations where the team decides to roll him out as well. So, I mean, there's a lot of different things that you can do with him. Now, when it comes to the concern, it was probably his elongated motion when it came to his release. This was what was said about him. I believe it was at one time during his senior year, according to Hudson Standish, who was a 24/7 sports reporter. The thing is that hopefully that's something that, is getting fixed, is getting worked on. You would imagine, and this is something that happens with left-handed quarterbacks. They're typically going to have something similar to a pitching-like motion. We've seen it before with a lot of guys that are lefties, but I don't think that's going to really stand in the way of him. The thing that's, cool about him is he is a more traditional quarterback. And I think he's a guy that is going to win a lot from the pocket. Probably one of those guys, because it seems like just about every quarterback is like this, where he's got that sneaky athleticism that'll show up when he gets to the college level. I mean, you look at what he did in high school. I mean, he ran for almost 600 yards in each of the 2 seasons that he was a starter. So really good player, comes from the Class 5 classification in the state, which is not the top level of competition, but still you face some really, really good competition there. Some guys that are going Division I, some guys that are going to the FBS. So I really like that pickup for Carolina. Now, another spot where they really hit on this time around is the linebacker position. And this is the position where, I mean, it's amazing that they go from losing Anthony Cruoff, and we're looking around, we're thinking, okay, this class is probably not going to have a linebacker in it. Carolina is extremely thin there. We're concerned about what this group looks like moving forward. To now, I mean, they bring in 3 really solid linebackers that I think can, help them moving forward. I mean, Tyler Hauser, I think, is outstanding. I love everything about him. Incredibly physical, high motor. You're going to notice that's something that appears with a lot of these guys. If you throw on their film, you're going to see guys that are chasing plays down from behind, and you're going to see guys that are incredibly physical. With him, I love his speed, love the burst that he has, which allows him to cover sideline to sideline. Not the most fluid linebacker that you'll see, but the thing is he makes plays in coverage. And so that's the thing that you're looking for. Even if you're not the linebacker that's moving the best, it maybe doesn't jump off the page to you. Like, let's say if you go and put on the film of Kamori House, the linebacker that transferred in out of Washington, that's a guy that, could probably play safety if he really wanted to. This is a guy in Hauser who is a more traditional inside linebacker, but he's definitely a guy that can open the hips up, can, stay with guys and make plays on the football. I mean, I love him. I love everything about Jake Bauer. I think he is, we'll talk about it. He's one of the most underrated players in this entire class. I don't think he gets enough run here. A guy that was formerly committed to Navy. So again, brings the toughness. He covers sideline to sideline as well as any of the linebackers in this class. The acceleration is off the charts. It's what allows him to hit guys so hard. And then it's the coverage ability. His coverage ability better than anybody in this class that Carolina has, and probably one of the better ones in this class overall for a guy that's a more traditional off the ball linebacker. So I really like this group that they put together. They then throw in Lance Pascal. I think you're going to have to figure out what you want to do with him. I like him better as an off ball guy. I thought the snaps that he took with St. Thomas Aquinas there. He looked really good. But what do you make of the linebacker position and how quickly they stacked up with a group of guys that I think a lot of people will look at and say, oh, they're not really ranked that highly? I think this group can produce some really, really good players moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that these are all guys, like you mentioned, that are very fundamentally strong, are willing to be physical. And I think that's going to be a big part of the defense. I think that's sort of the mold that we've seen in the past from Bill Belichick defenses and sort of defenses within that style. They want guys that have, you know, that are of that size, that are the 220, 230 range, that can hold up sort of between the tackles, and that's where they'll sort of want them to live the majority of the time. And, you know, relying on the nickels and safeties to just sort of help out with the edges and coverage duties. But I think that, like you said, that there are guys in here that are able to make plays in the pass game, that are able to cover sideline to sideline and move around. So, you know, it's not slow, unathletic that some may think it could be, but it's one which it's going to be focused on stopping the run in between the tackles first and foremost. Like you mentioned, I mean, what a turnaround for this group that they went from, you know, having Anthony Kruoff flip to Georgia for a while. At least in December, we didn't think that we were going to, you know, get a linebacker in this class, and then they go on this run similar to what they've done throughout January and now into February, of just guy after guy after guy. And now, you know, it's back to what should be a pretty full room come 2025, plus the transfer of Kamori House that sort of had a breakout season last year at Washington. So not only what they added in the 2025 class, but just overall to the room, they have improved that room. They've added the numbers that they need there. And there's a lot to like from these guys. I think it's pretty likely that we see 1 to 2 of these guys playing early on special teams, being involved in kickoff coverage or punt coverage, what have you, and that they, you know, they're guys that you're like, well, I see that number. I see 21 or I see 55 often, you know, on those duties. And that's just something to keep in the back of your mind for a sophomore or junior season when they really get to, you know, show what they have in the defense, on the field as a linebacker. I think that there's a few of those guys that will likely have that career trajectory over the next few years.
Yeah, I could see it. And the thing is, you know, they could potentially factor in even earlier. It really just depends on what this room looks like after you get out of spring practice, because, you know, spring practice is going to be big for a lot of groups. There is, you know, a demand on this crew, you know, this year that they have not felt before. This roster is, you know, a lot of the guys from last year. They did get a good amount of transfers in there, but even for the transfers, it's going to be a culture shock, because this is run like a professional organization. And, you know, there have already been people, you know, Eric McLean of the ACC Network, we talked with Taylor Tannenbaum, you know, just a couple of days ago on the podcast. And both of them said, yeah, expect there to be guys that go to the portal that maybe you don't even really expect, because they just, you know, can't handle being coached by a guy like Bill Belichick. They are pushing these guys heavily. And one position that I really think you wonder if this is why they have gone as aggressive as they did was interior defensive line. There are already rumors, you know, people have told me that, you know, some of the 24/7 message boards, some of the people from inside Carolina already saying that Carolina is going to be aggressive in the transfer portal in the spring, going out and getting guys along the defensive front, mainly on the interior of the defensive line, because they are not thrilled with where things are at there right now. So I think that tells you already that there could potentially be guys that enter the transfer portal. Even if it's not, Carolina still wants to upgrade there. And the interior group, they went out and hit very hard here in the last few weeks. You start with Nico Maggio, you know, who I think is the best of the group. I really like him. Another guy that was committed like Tyler Hauser was to Wake Forest, but with the change at head coach there, he decides to leave. And so Carolina is the team that seems to benefit the most from that, as they step in and land him. Look, bit undersized at 6'2", 280 pounds, but love the strength and physicality. That's what he plays with He, consistently sheds blocks and makes plays in the backfield. Those are the things that you really want to see. And then we talked about the motor on a lot of these guys. Maggio has it, a guy that'll run things down from behind. And there shouldn't be any concern about the level of competition, about the learning curve that he's going to have to undergo. Because here's the thing, if there's a level of football that's going to get you prepared, the second highest level in the state of Georgia is going to get you prepared. Buford is one of those schools that they play the best. I mean, you got to think that they had to face, I know it was Grayson was in the semifinals of the 6A playoffs. I forget who they got beat by. They got beat by another really good school, another school that plays like a national schedule. So, I mean, look, that's a guy that I don't have any concerns about coming in. Same thing. I know he was a guy that ended up, I believe, signing early when it was all said and done. He signed very late in the early signing period in Nwabusi Eziela. He's a guy that, with Raven Gap, played a national schedule this year. They did end up, coming back, playing a conference schedule, where they play teams from in the Charlotte area, basically, and Christ School, which is a school that's out in the mountains of North Carolina. But that's a level that gets you prepared. And so I think he's another guy that will be ready to come in and play immediately for Carolina. But then you get to the guys that Carolina added really late in the going. So Terry Giddens, transfer, was going to Navy. That's another guy that I really like because of the fact that he was going there. The thing that jumps off the screen for me about him, release, burst off the line of scrimmage immediately in the backfield and is able to make plays. In general, does a good job of shedding blocks, uses sort of a combination of the bull rush and technical moves, which is kind of what you want to see from a guy on the interior. You don't really want to see a guy that's just based on bull rush moves, because a lot of those guys, it's pretty predictable for them. They end up getting held up. Some of them are still able to make plays in the run game, but it's not as consistent as guys that can use those technical moves as well and get into the backfield to make plays. So I like him. And then you've got a couple other guys, Yasser Smith, who I think is probably going to end up having to move inside from the edge rusher spot. Just really doesn't do a whole lot for me out there. I don't think the speed is there. I don't know if the physicality is there. 265 pounds. So if he's going to move inside, he's going to have to put on some weight. Kamarian Thomas, a guy that, again, 265 pounds at 6'3", is, a little bit bigger than what you're going to get from Yasser Smith, who is 6'5", but definitely a guy that I think, you like the violence in his game, but he's got a long way to go. You watch his film, he's not the most, consistent player in terms of wowing you, even on his highlight tape. So I think there's going to be somewhat of a learning curve, and also plays at a very low level in the state of New York. New York as a whole, not the highest level of high school football. So the learning curve for him is going to be steep. And then Ladarian Williams, now he is very interesting. He's a guy that at one time was being heavily recruited. And I believe it was on the offensive side of the ball. I believe they were looking at him as an offensive tackle. And now he is, converted over to defensive line. Carolina was, the standout amongst a group like Arkansas State, Middle Tennessee, James Madison, I know, was in there for him. Marshall. Those were some of the later offers that he got after, schools like Florida, Georgia. Some of the big schools were on him early on in his career. But, when you look at this group of defensive linemen, what do you think about this group? And do you think that it might be sending the message that they are trying to get as many bodies in that room, because you never really know who ends up entering the transfer portal once we get past spring ball?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the case, if not the main case, of they're going to put as many guys in there and they're going to let the chips fall where they may in terms of what this group looks like post-spring. I think that it's probably correct that they came in and they were not in love with the group that they had, which I think is at least a little fair considering the number of guys that were so sort of like known commodities that left last year from this roster. So they lost a good number of that too deep from last year. They're starting over, and a lot of these guys are guys that they did not recruit, and that there's not, it may be for one reason or another. They don't feel like they have the motor. They don't feel like they fit their scheme. So I think that there is clearly a move by Coach Belichick and by his staff to revamp this room by any means necessary, whether that's bringing in a lot of these, high school guys and saying, hey, if you've got it, and we'll just play who we can of that. I think that there is going to be a pretty significant curve in terms of the strength and conditioning, not only of bulking guys up, because size, at least in the NFL version of what Bill Belichick was running on defense, bigger bodies in the middle specifically, having a size advantage there was paramount to how those defenses run. And what they were able to do, and the limitations that they had when they didn't have that. So I think that's going to be big. They're going to see, are there guys amongst this freshman class that they may not be finished products right now from, a height, weight, speed threshold, but we feel like they have the frame that we can, get them in our strength and conditioning program, that we can put the weight on them and then sort of have them as, being pretty fresh out of high school, that we can sort of mold them a little bit more than some of the guys that they already have. That could be the case. And then, like you mentioned, they are likely to sort of go look in the portal in the spring period and see who's there, who can we bring in to work at this position from that angle. And, who knows what that's going to be. The spring portal period, just overall, in terms of what North Carolina adds, what's out there for anyone to add, and then what specifically is out there on the line of scrimmage. Line of scrimmage is one of the hardest things to recruit in the portal more often than not. So I think that is sort of what I take overall from this, is that they are first and foremost looking to add bodies there. They want depth, because they would like to be rotational there. They want to keep guys fresh, but they want to have guys that fit what they want to do and can hold up from a strength and conditioning and just a, physicality standpoint. So I think this is a room that, like a lot of people predict, is going to see a fair amount of transition between now and, the end of August 2025. We'll see what that looks like ultimately. We'll also see what this roster looks like, or this room specifically, I should say, looks like going into 2026. But that's one that I could see changing very quickly in the spring. And then we'll see who's left come fall, and, who fills out that too deep. Are some of these guys on it? It's hard to say one way or the other at this point, but I don't know if there's any one position on, the starting rotation or even on the too deep that is locked in. It's going to be this guy. We know it's going to be this guy. They're sort of taking everything, busting it wide open, and starting from scratch on a lot of that, it feels like.
Yeah, another spot where it really feels like that is the edge rusher spot as well. When I look at this position, and Carolina goes with a couple of late additions here, you end up losing Camden Loudenschlager, who I think, one, wants to play linebacker. That seemed pretty clear to me when he ends up signing with Rhode Island and signs as a linebacker. But two, I think that was just a guy that, the staff really didn't feel like they connected with. Who knows if he was asked to leave to free up spots. But, Carolina, they go out and get a big name. They go out and get 4-star edge rusher Chinadu Onyegoro. This was a tremendous pickup. And this is a guy I think that they're hoping that sooner rather than later he's able to make an impact, because ton of upside to him and a lot of versatility. They used him at King Drew High School out there in Los Angeles, used him as both an edge rusher and an off-ball linebacker. So he can move around. He can line up in a lot of different spots, which I think is going to be something that, defensive coordinator Stephen Belichick is going to absolutely love. When you can throw in some of those NASCAR packages. And Carolina did it a little bit this year with Kamen Rucker when he was first coming back. But you saw as he started to get healthy, Carolina didn't do it as much. That's something that can be effective. When you have that many guys that are just there to rush the passer on 3rd and long, even if you're going to gamble on 3rd and medium sometimes, it can really pay off. This is the type of player that he is. Tremendous burst off the line of scrimmage. tackles, huge issue staying in front of them. And that's what you want to see. Guys that can get off, can time their jump off the line of scrimmage to that ball snapping and really get on these tackles, make it difficult for them to stay in front of them. Has the speed. You see it when he chases down plays from behind. And I think he does a really good job of wrapping up and making strong tackles in the backfield, which is why he has so many tackles for loss. Does a good job with the technical pass rush moves. And, just overall, really like his ability to shed blocks. Now, here's the thing. He doesn't have a lot of physicality to his game. That's going to be the thing that that he's going to have to end up adding to be able to play consistently at the next level. We've seen guys like this before, but I do like at 6'2", 220 pounds. I do think he's a long player. And the other thing that I really like about him as well is that he brings that versatility because he can drop into coverage. He did this a little bit in high school. Some of it was, yes, he was lining up as a linebacker. There were other times where they would just drop him back as a defensive end. And, Carolina's experimented with this a few times. It hasn't necessarily worked. For a guy like Onyegoro, if he comes in, plays at a weight that's similar to what he's at now, maybe a little bit more, that's when you can start to get creative with dropping him into coverage and everything like that. Here's the thing. He played at a lower level of competition in the state of California. That's another area where people can be concerned, but it is California, guys. Even if you're playing at a lower level, that's one of the best states that you can play high school football in. You're always going to be facing talent. So they bring him in, and then they also bring in a guy that comes from technically the college level. It's the junior college level. It's in Canada, out of Montreal, Quebec, at Vanier College. That would be Emmanuel Nwaiwu, I believe is how you pronounce his name. And, 6'4", 250, much, much more of a college-ready guy right now in terms of his size. The thing is that he's not nearly as impressive. I will say, does a good job of using the technical pass rush moves to shed blocks. Will need to become a little more physical in order to play at this level, but I do think that there is some physicality there. The thing that he needs to be able to prove is that he can set an edge consistently in the run game. And that's another thing for Onyegoro too. When you watch a lot of these guys that come from the high school level, from the junior college level, there are guys, when you're an edge rusher, you're typically told, get up the field and get to the quarterback. Get up the field and drop the running back in the backfield almost immediately as he's getting the handoff. You're not taught often how to set an edge the way that you need to be able to do at the college level. And so I think that's going to be the biggest challenge for both of these guys. But I like both of these pickups. When it comes to Nwaiwu, is he going to be a guy that automatically comes in and starts playing for Carolina right away? I have no idea. You would think with a junior college guy, he would be able to do that. But remember, you do get 5 years of eligibility or 4 years of eligibility, whichever one it is. I'm so confused on the rulings and everything like that come down from the NCAA at this point. But you will get a full career out of him. So you can take as much time as you want to when it comes to developing him. Michigan State was on him, so I think that's certainly a good sign. Onyegoro is the guy that I think, don't be shocked if him or Austin Alexander, either one of those two guys, really start to progress this season and eventually get onto the field. And I think that's what Carolina is hoping for in an edge rusher room that, again, doesn't have a lot of proven commodities outside of the guys that they got in the transfer portal, one of which comes from Delaware, where he was solid this year, but really didn't do a whole lot of outside of that in the years prior.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's what they're trying to figure out is, can these guys come in and be early contributors? We don't know. It feels like it is at least slightly less of a priority than the interior defensive line that we mentioned previously. But, I feel like that on the defense and on sort of the line of scrimmage specifically, they want to be able to, if possible, and it's very rare to do in general, and it's even harder to do in the era of NIL and the transfer portal, but they want to be able to potentially platoon guys, take out 4, put in a fresh 4. They want to be able to mix and match based on those different passages. Like, is it 3rd and long? Is it 2nd and long? Is it a goal to go situation? Is it the red zone? They want to have different personnel groupings for all of those. So I think it is going to be important that they see what these additions that they made, can you contribute in that 2 deep or even that 3 deep early on? Like we mentioned at the top, they're going with more scholarships on the whole as part of the house settlement. So what does that look like in terms of an actual playing roster? Do you go deeper into your depth as you play overall? Is that something that you can even do just practically? Does it make sense from a playing perspective? So I think those are all things that they're trying to answer. And similar, not quite to the extent of the interior defensive line, I think that they are just going to get this roster for the spring and for the summer as best they can, figure out what they have, and then, if guys want to enter the portal from there, so be it. But right now, it's just we need to get bodies in here. They've added significantly at that 27 high school signees, 18 transfers. So that's 45 new additions. That's a ton into this roster. Right now, they just want to see, what do we have? What was left over by the previous staff? And, what can we craft with these pieces that we have at this point? And, how can we sort of put these guys out there and let the chips fall where they may in terms of not only 2025, but 2026 and beyond of, building for success in the long term.
Yeah, feels like they're also doing that. You move over to the offensive side at the running back position where they've added multiple guys. Of course, Damon June Jr. was the guy that was, with the class for a while. Carolina ends up landing his commitment over Florida State, who was starting to show interest towards the end. They then add Jarrell Cobb, another in-state guy who ended up signing early with Carolina, is actually on campus right now. Both of those guys, I think, are guys that, could come in, could make impacts. But then, you bring in Joseph Trope, a guy who is actually, believe it or not, ranked higher than Jarrell Cobb, a guy that, was committed to Temple at the time, ends up flipping, but, I think is probably a little bit better than that commitment would tell you. And then you get Jalen Nichols, a guy who is unranked, but, when you turn on the film with him, there's really a lot to like. Very, very electric player. He has great open field speed, great burst. His strength is, how he is able to evade tacklers as well. There's a lot of really good things that to like about him. Sticks his foot in the ground, changes direction very quickly. Good use of the spin move, which was something that you don't really see a lot of guys use anymore, but he used it a couple of times. Love the mean streak that he runs with, as I mentioned. Biggest question marks for him, of course, how he progresses as a pass catcher and what he can do as a pass protector. Trope, it's very similar in terms of the type of player that he is. Carolina hasn't had a lot of these explosive running backs. They really have been looking for a lot more of the physical backs, and that's what Damon June is. That's what Jarrell Cobb is. Guys that get the ball, go downhill. They will, lower a shoulder and run through you. They're not going to impress you with their breakaway speed. This is what Trope can do. He's a guy, 5'9", 202 pounds. He's built stout, but he has the speed and acceleration that you need to create those home run plays, man. Something that Carolina, even with Amari and Hampton, at times they've sort of missed that home run ability. A guy that can simply take the ball and immediately he's taken it to the house. I thought Hampton this year did a much better job than he did of that last year, but I do think you want those home run hitters that you can occasionally throw in there. One of the things for him, he does have, that power to be able to run through guys. Trope does. Just not as many as the backs that Carolina has had in recent memory. Doesn't catch the ball a ton, but when he does, he looks pretty natural with it, and he has the ability to turn those catches into big plays. Biggest thing about him, as I mentioned with Nichols, is pass protection. And then for him, it's going to be he plays at the 2A level of high school football in the state of Florida. I think that's going to mean a very steep learning curve coming from a very, very small classification in that state. Again, it's the state of Florida. If there's a state for you to be in a small classification in, it's certainly that state. But I do think that there is going to be some time that's going to need to be afforded to them. But still, I like this running back group. And here's the thing, Zach, they're going to have to be involved early because you're talking about a room similar to the quarterback room where you've got a guy that returns in Davian Gauss who you really like, believe that he's going to be your starting running back. You've got Caleb Hood, and that's it. Then you get to the freshmen, and they're going to have to pick up the slack and carry this room because, unfortunately, Carolina hasn't been able to land another running back out of the transfer portal.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they certainly looked for running backs out of the portal, but this is what they have at this point. And, it's sort of similar to quarterback in that sense that this is a group that can play early, but also going to have to play early or just be part of the conversation. With the room overall, like you mentioned, you have Davion Gauss. He's sort of, after a very, very good freshman campaign, he's sort of going to be the guy here is what the expectation is.
Mm-hmm.
You have Caleb Hood that can provide you with stability, but he's not been able to find a solid playing time. He's had injuries in the past, and so you don't really know necessarily what you have in him. Is he going to be a reliable number two? It's hard to say right now when you got a JUCO guy right at basically right before the 2024 season started in Charleston French that you don't really know what you're getting there. So It is very, very likely that some of these guys in this freshman class figure out a way to, if it's not second string, third string, or something along those lines, they're going to play early. Someone in this group is going to play early. And I think it's a good balanced room. It's got, like you mentioned, it's got those guys that can play with power, but it also has those guys that can play with speed. And I think that both of those things are going to be important for this offense. I think that it is likely under new offensive coordinator Freddie Kitchens to be an offense that puts an emphasis on running the ball. I don't think that this is going to be sort of what we saw from a Phil Longo offense in terms of its structure, though that offense did have a lot of very good running backs and had running success with guys like Javonte Williams and Michael Carter. I don't think it's going to be necessarily the Larry Fedora style where it's more that spread option, even if it's able to run. I think that you're going to see probably more traditional or more NFL style of running the football, of putting a premium on running the football. And it's going to be paramount to offensive drives and to things like that they have these guys that, sure, they may not impress you with their big breakaway speed, but they can turn what is on average a 4-yard run into a 6-yard run just by having that physicality, just by falling forward and getting the extra yards. And I think that in the ideal expression of this offense, it's going to be a group that can have a 6-minute drive to ice out a game at the end so that their defense doesn't have to go back on the field. But they do have guys with speed as well to sort of to balance that. One that was a very late addition, under recruited out of the state of Louisiana, is Jalen Nichols. When you put on the film, you can see there's pretty good speed there from what I can see. And, a guy that can break away, can accelerate quickly, can move, side to side, has agility. So he is a guy that is still, I think, learning how to be running back, how to play, the position within the game of football. But there is speed here amongst this group that they have to sort of complement those power guys that they brought in as well. And, Davion Gauss, that sort of feels more like Amarian Hampton, that he has that breakaway speed, but, it's going to be physicality that takes him a lot of the way. But this is another room like quarterback that, I think that there's a lot of promise here, and that promise is going to be tested pretty early. So it's something that I'm excited to see come this fall. And really, at this point, it's one where someone in this group is going to be a name that we know, that the fan base overall, those that don't follow recruiting, there's going to be one of these guys that they know by name come November of 2025.
Yeah, last position that we'll take a look at here is the wide receiver position, because Carolina goes and adds two pretty explosive players to this wide receiver room. Shenard Clower, a guy who I think is just criminally underrated in this class. And I'll give you a hint. He is one of the guys that I will talk about when we talk about the underrated guys, in this class. I mean, one of the most explosive players that I saw. His speed, burst, his top end allows him to pull away from defenders in the open field. I mean, almost every time that he touches the football, it turns into a big play. He has a great ability to stop and start on the dime, change his direction in the blink of an eye. And that's something that, will show up with him after the catch if he is used in the return game. Good, really strong route runner and can consistently win deep. Which is something that, the team should be looking for after last year. Yeah, they have guys that were able to do that, a guy like Chris Culliver, but it just wasn't consistent enough. Clower is the type of guy that can certainly do that for you. Has good hands and can adjust to the football well as well. So I really like everything about him. And then you get Madrid Tucker. And here's the thing about Madrid. He's a guy that, when I first watched him, I thought that the defensive film on him was really, really good. And I thought they might put him out there as a defender. But then when you started to watch him a little bit more on the offensive side of the ball, 5'11", 165 pounds. So again, smaller guy. They use him a little bit on the outside. But as a slot receiver, I mean, this is a dude that has as good of hands as you're going to get. He catches just about anything that is thrown his way, whether it is a 50-50 ball that he has to jump up to get, whether it's a ball that is thrown as an anticipation throw that is way out in front of him and he simply has to find a way to run under it and barely save it from hitting the turf. He did it multiple times. I mean, he is a guy that lives with the spectacular. That's what his highlight tape is full of. In terms of, running routes, I think he's a little bit limited in terms of his route tree at the high school level. But here's the thing, that'll grow, especially when Carolina starts to use him more in the slot as opposed to on the outside. But I think there's a lot to really like about him. The 5A level of competition in the state of Florida, very competitive. That's where schools like St. Thomas Aquinas, Lakeland, who we just talked about with Clower, I think that is a pretty good level of high school football there. So I think both of these guys, they're lower ranked guys, but I do think that they are guys that could be on the field sooner rather than later if they continue to show in practice when they get there in the summer that they are just as explosive as they were when they were at the high school level.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you look at where this room was overall, this is a position group that I think many fans, especially those that follow recruiting, thought, in terms of the talent that was left behind, it has good young talent there. It has guys like Chris Culliver that you mentioned that's going to move into his junior season. We saw a fair number of these guys play early, like Jordan Ship, Alex Taylor a few times, Javarius Green. We've seen, obviously, Christian Hamilton, when he was on the field, was a guy that had a pretty good role. So it feels like that they had guys on this team, or rather on the 2024 team, that, seem poised to take a bigger role in 2025, but they added, several sort of value picks through the portal. And then they got these high school guys very recently. And similar to what you mentioned, or along the lines of what you mentioned, what sort of stuck out to me of reading about these guys, of their comments from when they committed, and just what we've seen from different positions group, is this coaching staff is really selling the slot receiver position. They're selling the success that obviously Bill Belichick had with the position in New England. You have guys like Danny Amendola, you have guys like Wes Welker, things along those lines. So that's a position that they had a lot of success with, and it's a position that they sort of use in tandem with the tight end to have those those inside guys be able to get the ball and get yards after catch. In sort of the short field, they love to throw on the seams, intermediate throws, things along those lines. So I think that position in particular, and guys that play that position, are going to have big opportunities in this offense, in whatever scheme that they choose to run and how they choose to run it. So getting these guys, like you mentioned, they do have speed. It is something where specifically with Madrid, Tucker, like you mentioned, he is going to have to sort of grow into that position. He's sort of played both ways a lot of his time in high school already, but you have a guy in Clower that just has that explosive speed. You really like what he brings to the table, and what he can be as a position here. And then another one that you have alongside that of could be a wide receiver, could be a tight end, could play edge as well in Kennedy Azoma, that is more of a developmental guy, but has that sort of frame, has the size and long arms that you can see why some schools wanted him to play edge. You can see potentially a receiving tight end or an outside receiver, but a great weapon to have in the red zone likely in the next few years. So they've got some guys that they can put at different positions. It sounds like that in the future, not only with the true freshmen they bring in, but with the wide receiver group on a whole, they're going to mix and match these guys, not necessarily cross train, but they want guys that they can put at different positions to create specific matchups for whatever that offensive plan is, wherever they find a specific receiver versus defensive back matchup that they like, which I think is very fascinating. I think that this group of guys that they added here in 2025 in January and into February, I think it's an interesting group of guys. I don't know if it's going to be necessarily a situation where these guys play early. Maybe one of them can get that too deep. But I think it's an interesting group. I think that it's a group that in the future could really show that even early on what sort of the eye for talent that not only Coach Belichick, but the staff has to sort of get these guys that are a little under recruited but can sort of blossom once they get to the college level and really develop into potential NFL prospects, which is the entire sort of sales pitch of Bill Belichick returning to the college level.
Yeah, Uzama will be really interesting to see what they do with him. I mean, a guy that's 6'5", has some really good size, long strider, pretty good speed. You could play him on the outside, but you could also play him at tight end. And I do kind of wonder if that's where they end up playing him, just because they didn't pick up a tight end here in the late period. I mean, that's really the last question before we move on. How shocked are you that they didn't go out and get another tight end, considering that, they had two guys that were committed at one time in this class with Marshall Pritchett Jr. and Logan Farrell, and they come out with this, they as of right now don't have a tight end. That was a spot I thought for sure they might go out and get somebody, especially with them losing both Bryson Nesbitt and John Copenhaver this offseason.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little surprising, especially if you consider the history that Bill Belichick had with the tight end position in New England. 12 personnel was a huge part of what they did with different tight end tandems. Obviously, Rob Gronkowski was one of the biggest names at the position, not only during Coach Belichick's time in New England, but just throughout the history of the NFL. So, it's positioned similar to the slot receiver, that they really like these outside guys being sort of, for lack of a better word, their stars of their sort of passing game, and not necessarily having those long 50-50 balls down the field, but finding, whether it be holes in the zone or finding the seam, or finding something underneath that a guy can take for additional yards. That's what the New England passing game, and what likely the North Carolina passing game this fall is going to look like. That's sort of, if we're going to look for a reference point, that's what it's going to be. So it is a little surprising. It's obviously a position where they took a transfer in Connor Cox, but you thought maybe they'd add another. In terms of experience is fairly light in terms of what these guys have done. You have a guy in Jake Johnson that played a little bit. He played at times behind guys like John Copenhaver and Bryson Nesbitt when healthy, but this is not a position room that they have a lot of experience in. So I imagine it was a priority, and that may be alongside interior defensive line, that may be a priority in the spring of, is there a guy in the spring portal window that we feel can come in and be a veteran presence that knows what they're doing, that sort of knows how we want business to be done from the tight end position, both blocking and receiving. So that's something maybe post spring to watch in terms of, do they like where they're at this do they like where they're at for this position group? Do they feel like that there's a guy that they can reasonably go get? And then we'll see sort of where they go from there and how this roster ends up specifically at that position.
Yeah, and remember, grad transfers can enter at any time. So if there is a big name that enters, I think that's certainly a position to watch. All right, let's get to some of our superlatives for this class. We'll do 3 of them. We'll have the guy that we think can be the best player in this class. I think there might be a pretty obvious one there, so maybe we'll toss him out and then pick from the rest of the group there. And then, we'll also have guys that can make the early impact, and same thing with the underrated guys in this class. I think the most obvious guy for pretty much all of these except the underrated one is Bryce Baker. I think he makes the most sense. You would expect that he is the best in this class, a guy that's rated 86th overall in this class. For comparison, Austin Alexander, who is the second highest rated player in this class, is rated 474 overall. So he is a guy that is miles ahead of everybody else. You would expect, in terms of being, a guy that could have an impact early, he's going to be involved in the quarterback battle. There is a good chance in a lot of people's minds. I mean, if I had to make a prediction right now on who ends up being your starting quarterback, I think he's probably the guy that Carolina ends up going with. So let's take him out of the equation for both of those, because that seems like the fairly obvious answer. And let's go with the rest of that group. Who do you think, Zach, has the chance to be the best player overall from the rest of the group not named Bryce Baker in this class?
It's going to be, I think, an odd selection, considering that we're taking him out, taking Bryce Baker out specifically. I think it could be the other quarterback. I think it could be Arturi Newkirk. After seeing the film and seeing, his sort of rise in the rankings and seeing, what he has there in terms of how he played the game, he would, I'm putting him here. If I didn't put him here, I'd probably put him in the underrated spot, just because I feel pretty highly on him and, how he plays the game. There are situations like this where, guys just don't get seen, but you see it on film. He's not playing at the highest level of Virginia football, but, Maury and Norfolk, it's in the Tidewater area. The competition for the state of Virginia is still pretty good. That's a school that, North Carolina has recruited in the past. It's one that they're familiar with. So, this is a guy that I could see being very good. Not necessarily, beating out Bryce Baker, especially early on, but if they were able to keep both of these guys, and it's very hard to keep, 2 quarterbacks in the same class for that period of time, but if they're able to keep both these guys throughout what will be their college careers, it's not impossible that we see a scenario similar to Sam Howell to Drake May, and that's a high comparison, but a similar, very competent, very good quarterback play, just sort of not missing a beat going from one to the other, in this instance being going from Bryce Baker to Arturi Newkirk. So in terms of who could be the best, I do think it's him. If for some reason it's not Bryce Baker, I think it could be him. It could be a scenario like that. But I think, again, they did really, really well with quarterback pickups in this class. It might be the group that, for me, gets the superlative. If there's one for, position group that they did the best on, it might be quarterback for me. And that's, surprising to say, but this is a group that I think could come in and, could play winning ACC football very early on.
Yeah, Matt Lombardi's got a heck of a group there, and a group that I think, it's probably going to be underrated because there isn't going to be a lot of experience, but I do think that both of those guys have a chance to succeed. If I had to go with one out of this group, I think I might go with Tyler Hauser. I really like him a lot. I just, when I threw on the film, I thought this was a guy that looked like the type of player that Bill Belichick wants. As I said, dude is just all over the place on the field. The high motor is something you love from these guys. The fact that he's able to cover sideline to sideline, that's really what you want to see. able to, create pressure on the quarterback pretty consistently when they blitz him because of just how physical he is. He runs down plays from behind, which is something that you really love to see. And the way that he hits people, it is punishing every time that he hits you. I think he is certainly a guy that, when he comes in here, I don't know if he's going to have the impact right away in year one. Would it shock me if he's a guy that's on the 2 deep when Carolina starts the season? Absolutely not. He is just that type of player. He feels like the junkyard dog type of linebacker that you really want. I absolutely love him, and he's the guy that I have to go with here. The other one that I considered was Austin Alexander, because I really think that he has a chance to make an impact, right away too. That sort of leads us into our next one. What do you think of this group? Who do you think has the chance to make the biggest impact early on?
I mean, in terms of the biggest impact early on, it's got to be one of the running backs. It's hard to pit who specifically, whether that be Damon June, Gerald Cobb, Joseph Troop, even Jalen Nichols. It's hard to say, but it's going to be one of those guys. It feels like it almost has to be, just because of, the lack of discernible, whether it be, experience, talent, what have you, in front of them. Running back seems to be the position that, you can get on the field earliest, and make the biggest impact at an early position. That wide receiver, once you are able to at least get a comparable level of pass blocking down, you can generally get on the field, which is why we saw a guy like David Gauss get on the field early last year. So, a little bit of a cop out, I guess. If I had to pick one, it might be, Cobb or June, just because those guys were committed a little bit earlier on. If I believe correctly, I think that, one or two are already on campus. So whatever those group is able to get in and, take to strength and conditioning the quickest, get up to date with the playbook the quickest, that's going to be the guy that I think has the greatest impact on this team in the fall. And, like we mentioned with this group earlier, whoever that is, that guy, he's going to be your number 2, number 3 running back, and a guy that, fans know come late in the season, November, December.
Yeah, I think you're in the right room for sure. To me, I would say the guy out of that group that probably ends up having the biggest impact, and therefore the biggest impact right away, is going to be Damon June Jr. I think that's your guy. You look at a guy that is just incredibly decisive, tough-nosed runner, which is something that this staff, I think, is going to value just like the previous staff did. Natro Means is going to be the running backs coach. He's a guy that was there for the last 4 years teaching these running backs alongside of Larry Porter. And with this group, we saw a ton of physicality, guys that just, ran, either through that A-B gap, and, they would really have success. That's the exact type of runner that Damon June Jr. is. I think this guy has a chance to be a really, really good player for Carolina. Now, how much does he play? I'm not really sure. Could he take on that role that, we saw, from Davian Gauss this year? I certainly think that is possible. The reason why I think it's possible, because I know a lot of people will say, well, what are you saying? You think he's really going to beat out Caleb Hood? It's not that, man. It's just that Caleb Hood has not been able to stay healthy. So at some point, you would think there's going to be a period of time where Caleb Hood is banged up. Is it Charleston French who steps up? I think that's there's certainly a chance that he could be that guy. But, this is a guy that came from the JUCO level. I don't know if he's a guy that's going to establish himself as a part of the rotation, where, Damon June Jr. is a guy that has 4 years of eligibility. He's one that this staff probably feels pretty good about, especially after he was able to stay in that class that Carolina had. And, that's a reason why, I think that Freddie Kitchens is really going to look at him highly. I think that's the guy that makes the biggest early impact for Carolina this season. But any of those running backs, I think, certainly have a chance if they are able to stand out, especially, the last two that Carolina brought in, because they are so different. That explosive aspect, I think, certainly could be a big part of why Carolina wants to get them on the field early. All right, now we get to the most underrated guy in this class. I think there are so many guys that we could put in here. Hell, I would even put my guy Damon June Jr., who I just said, in that category. But to you, if you had to name one guy that's the most underrated in this class, who are you going with, Zach?
Well, I think I'm going to pick a separate running back here. For me, it is going to be Jalen Nichols. I think he's a guy that's still learning how to play the game. And, all of these guys are to some extent as high school players. But I think he specifically, there is a reason that he has the ranking that he has right now. But you certainly see when he's on the field, when he's making plays, what the potential is in the future down the line. And, similar to some of these running backs that can make a name for themselves early, if this is a guy that's able to come in and, establish himself in strength and conditioning, establish himself in the playbook, I think that, as a sophomore, junior, even into a senior year, could be a very explosive weapon for this offense to have. And, for such a late pickup, he's a guy that I'm very excited to see what he looks like over the next few years, hopefully under this coaching staff.
Yeah, to me, I mean, look, there's so many different guys that I could go here. I really like my guy, Shenard Clower. I think he is incredibly underrated, but to me, it's Jake Bauer. I think the linebacker out of Malvern Prep. I love both of these linebackers that Carolina got in this class that are currently ranked and ranked pretty highly. I think, when it comes to Lance Pascal, the thing about him is going to be figuring out his position. They keep him as a off-ball linebacker. He certainly has potential as well. But Bauer, I mean, this is a guy that I really think could be a blue chip prospect. Could be a guy that would fit inside that top 500 when I watched him. Because, I mean, he's everywhere on the field. As I mentioned earlier, can cover sideline to sideline. The acceleration is really what allows him to lay hard hits consistently, which is what you see from him often on film. Very similar to what we see from Hauser. He makes guys pay with the football, and that's what this team really needs. They need these physical, hard-hitting players that are going to change the mindset around Tar Heel football. The other thing that you really like about him is the coverage ability, which is the best of the three linebackers that the team has added in this class. It might be the best of anyone in this cycle. I mean, his ability to shift his weight, change directions is what allows him to, cover a receiver and chase a ball carrier down. And it looks very smooth. So I love everything about his game. He's a guy that, to me, the sooner that you can get him on the field, the better. Same thing with Tyler Hauser. I think both guys are going to be tremendous players for this team, and especially being coached by Bob Diaco, who I think, a lot of people were pretty angry when that hire was made, saying, well, he hasn't really been all that successful here recently. Guys, this is a dude that's been around for a long, long time. Even though he hasn't had a ton of success recently, especially when he's been a defensive coordinator, he's not in that role. He's going to be coaching the linebackers. I think these guys are going to benefit heavily from him, and that's why I'll go with Jake Bauer as my most underrated. So that is your look at the 2025 recruiting class for the Tar Heels. If you want a more in-depth look at all of these guys, head over to the website, HeelToughBlog.com. We've got the 2025 signing day breakdown up there for you guys. Make sure you go and check out all of that. Read about each and every one of the guys in this class, even some of the guys we didn't talk about at length here tonight. All of those breakdowns are there for you guys. My scouting report on every single one of those guys you can check out in there. So it's a very cool article. It's one of my favorite ones that I write each and every year. So make sure you go and check that out. Also, any other news that's coming out, we do have a visit in the 2026 class, an official visit that has been scheduled already. That will be something I will be writing about tonight, more than likely putting up in the morning for you guys to check out. Wanted to make sure that the focus was really on this 2025 class here as we went into tonight's episode. So we'll start moving forward tomorrow and taking a look at that 2026 class. So A lot of great stuff for you guys to check out here in the coming days when it comes to that. Any other on-field news, any other staffing news, we will have you covered on that front as well. Basketball side of things, Carolina still in action. They've had a week off here. They get back at it on Saturday against Pittsburgh. So hopefully Carolina can get things turned back in the right direction and begin to start to pick up some significant wins that they can add to their resume as they try to make a push for that NCAA tournament. So make sure you check out all the coverage that Josh has on the website for you. And then, of course, over on the podcast side of things, me and him taking you through each and every game, as well as the news of Carolina looking for a GM. He has an article up, 2 articles up, both separate, one on Buzz Peterson, one on Jim Tanner. So make sure you check those articles out and then listen to the podcast that we did today on all of that. You can get that wherever you listen to your podcast, same place that you can get this podcast. In terms of the social medias, make sure that you like the Facebook page for us, subscribe on the YouTube page if you're watching that way. And then, of course, over on the Twitter page, I know a lot of you guys watching on Josh's personal Twitter. You can, of course, follow him. Follow me at HTB Anthony. Just take the underscore out that Josh has in his name. And then Zack Hubbard, you can find him at HackZubbard2 on Twitter as well. So make sure that you guys are checking all of those for any of the latest news. Give us a follow. And then, of course, the Heel Tough blog Twitter page. That is the main source for all of the stuff that you need. Go on there, follow the page, but also hit that bell right next to it to turn on the notifications so that you get every notification whenever we post an article. You will get a notification on Twitter that will let you know that we have posted something, whether it's an article, podcast will also be in there, any of that kind of stuff. It will alert you. So make sure that you have that turned on so you don't miss anything. If you don't want to do that, check the website morning, afternoon, evening, because we have so much news that has been coming out here recently that we always encourage you to do that. But that wraps it up once again for tonight's episode. Want to thank Zack for hosting with me. Want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.